I did what I could with what I had. She turned out fine without me. Those were my father's exact words into the microphone at my wedding reception, spoken to 80 guests at a banquet hall in Ottawa on a Saturday evening in late September. He clinked his glass, sat down, and reached for his bread roll, like he hadn't just publicly described his own daughter as something he'd merely survived. The room was quiet for about 3 seconds, that particular kind of quiet where people are deciding whether to laugh or not. A few guests near the back started clapping, slowly, carefully, as if clapping felt safer than silence. My new husband Patrick reached under the table and found my hand. Before my father sat down completely, he slid a white envelope across the table toward me. I stared at it. My Aunt Rosalind, my mother's younger sister, was seated 2 tables over. I watched her watch him. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. A tightening, a recognition, and for a reason I couldn't name in that moment, it frightened me more than his words had. I set the envelope beside my plate and told myself I'd open it later. My name is Celia. I'm 29 years old. I work as a registered nurse at the Ottawa hospital, and I have spent most of my life trying to earn something from my father that he never seemed to have available for me. Approval maybe, or just warmth, the kind you don't have to work for. My mother died of an aggressive cancer when I was 11. I don't remember as much as I wish I did. Her hands, the specific blue of her reading glasses, the way she called me Bird for reasons I never thought to ask about when I still had the chance. After she died, my father remarried a woman named Wendy within 3 years. Wendy brought a son from her previous marriage, Ellis, who was 2 years younger than me, and who became, almost immediately, the version of a child my father seemed to have always wanted. I told myself that was normal. Blended families are complicated. I had read enough to know that. But then there were the small things. When I got accepted into nursing school, my father asked if I had considered something more practical. When I graduated, he didn't attend the pinning ceremony because Wendy had planned a weekend trip to Tremblant with Ellis and his hockey team, and my father needed to drive. When I called to tell him I was engaged to Patrick, he said, "Okay, let me know the date so I can check the calendar." I kept making excuses for him. He was busy. He was managing a lot. He wasn't good at showing emotion. I believed what was easier to believe. I walked into my own wedding telling myself that maybe this would be the moment. Maybe he would look at me in my dress or watch me exchange vows with a man who genuinely loved me, and something would finally soften. Instead, he gave a toast that made 3 of my coworkers exchange glances across the room. After dinner, when the speeches were over and guests began drifting toward the bar, I slipped away to the washroom and opened the envelope he had left me. Inside was a generic greeting card, flowers on the cover, no printed message inside, nothing written by hand, and a single folded bill. $150. Not a check, not something transferred. $150 Canadian, folded in thirds, tucked inside an unsigned card. I stood in the bathroom of my own wedding reception and looked at it for a long moment. I had worked a 12-hour shift the Tuesday before the wedding. I had saved for 2 years for the dress. I had organized nearly every detail of that day myself, because asking for help felt like asking for something I hadn't earned. $150. I folded it back up, put it in my clutch, and went back to the party. My Aunt Rosalind found me near the dessert table around 9 o'clock. She's only 12 years older than me, and she has always been the person who filled in the gaps my family left open. She was at my nursing school graduation with flowers and a card that said, "Your mother would have stood the longest." That evening at the reception, she put her hand on my arm and said quietly, "Can we sit somewhere for a minute?" We found 2 chairs near the coat check. The music was loud enough that we could talk without being overheard. "What did he put in that envelope?" she asked. I told her. Her jaw tightened. She looked toward the far side of the room, where my father was laughing with one of his golf friends. "Rosalind," I said, "what's going on?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "There's something I should have told you years ago, and I want you to know that I genuinely believed it had been handled." I waited. "Not tonight," she said. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small card, and wrote her address on the back. "Come see me next Wednesday. Bring nothing. Just yourself." Patrick and I left for Prince Edward Island the next morning for our honeymoon. It was 10 days of red sand beaches and fresh seafood and the particular relief of being 2 people in love with nowhere to be. But I woke up several mornings with a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain, a question I hadn't asked yet. My aunt's expression when she watched my father set down that envelope still playing somewhere behind my thoughts. I called her once from the island just to confirm Wednesday. She picked up before the second ring. "I'm here," she said, that was all. Her house is a small brick semi in Gloucester, the same house she's lived in for 15 years, since she moved to Ottawa to be closer to my mother in the final year of her illness. When I arrived that Wednesday morning, she had coffee ready and a metal document box sitting on the kitchen table. I recognized it. I had seen it once before when I was 14, at my grandmother's house, the year after she died. Rosalind had taken it home then. I had never thought to ask what was inside. "Sit down, Celia," she said. She opened the box and removed a folder. Inside were documents, real documents with seals and signatures and dates going back over 20 years. She placed them on the table between us. "Before your mother died," Rosalind said, "she created a trust in your name." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. "She owned a property, a small house in Canada. She bought it with her first job, before she met your father. It was in her name only. After her diagnosis, she spoke with a lawyer and placed the property into a trust for you, to be held until you turn 25. I saw my mother's name on the document, then mine below it. Your father was named as trustee," Rosalind continued. "He was responsible for managing everything until you came of age." I had turned 25 4 years ago. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. Rosalind looked down at her coffee. "I thought he had. When you turned 25, I asked him how things were going with the transfer. I didn't phrase it directly. I was trying to be careful. And he said everything had been sorted out. I assumed he meant he had given you the asset or the proceeds. I thought you knew." "I didn't know," I said. My voice came out very flat. "I know," she said. "I figured that out at your wedding when I saw what he handed you." She pushed the folder toward me. I opened it. The trust deed was there. My mother's signature at the bottom. A lawyer's seal, dated about 8 months before she died. She had done this deliberately, in the middle of everything she was going through. She had spent what little energy she had left making sure I would be protected. Behind the trust deed was a letter, handwritten, clipped to the deed with a single paper clip. I recognized her handwriting from birthday cards. "Celia Bird, this house is for your future. When you're ready, sell it or keep it. It's yours to decide. I want you to have choices." I don't know exactly how long I sat there. Rosalind didn't rush me. Eventually I looked up and asked, "What happened to the property?" Her expression told me before she spoke. "That's what we need to find out." I drove home with photocopies of the documents on my passenger seat, and my mother's letter folded carefully inside my coat pocket. I held it against my chest for the last few minutes of the drive, one hand on the wheel. That night, I called a friend from nursing school, Tariq, who had since gone back to school for financial planning. I explained what I knew. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Celia, this is serious. If a trustee fails to distribute trust assets when the beneficiary reaches the age of distribution, that's a breach of fiduciary duty under Ontario law. It doesn't just disappear." "Can I find out what happened to the property?" I asked. "Ontario Land Registry is public record," he said. "You can search the title history yourself. If it was sold, it'll show up." I did the search that night at my kitchen table while Patrick made tea. It took less than 10 minutes. The Canada house had been sold 7 years ago, when I was 22, 3 years before I would ever have been legally entitled to receive anything from the trust. The sale price was listed $387,000. My father had sold my mother's house 3 years before he was obligated to hand anything over to me. I stared at the screen. Outside it started to rain. Patrick came to stand behind me, read the screen over my shoulder, and sat down beside me without saying a word. "I need to understand where $387,000 went," I said. The next morning, I made an appointment with an estates lawyer named Annalise. She reviewed the trust documents, the letter, and the land registry records carefully, and then looked at me across her desk. "You were the sole beneficiary of this trust," she said. "Your father had no legal authority to sell that property without holding the proceeds in trust and distributing them to you on your 25th birthday. What he did, if the funds were not preserved and delivered to you, may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, and depending on how the money was used, potentially more than that, we need to formally request the trust account records." The formal requests were filed, and then we waited. 2 weeks later, I drove to my father's house in Nepean on a Tuesday afternoon without calling ahead. I rang the doorbell and stood on the step. Wendy answered. She called his name into the house. My father came to the door in his weekend clothes. He looked at me the way he sometimes did, like he was calculating something just behind his eyes. "Can I come in?" I asked. We sat in the living room. Wendy stayed in the kitchen. I could hear her moving dishes. I said carefully, "I found some of Mom's old documents recently, from her estate." He went still. "I didn't know she owned property when she died," I said. The pause was 2 seconds, but I was watching his face, and those 2 seconds told me everything. "That was a long time ago," he said. "Things were complicated after she passed. There were estate fees, legal costs, expenses I had to cover." "What happened to the house in Canada?" I asked. "It was sold," he said, "to cover costs." "Which costs?" His jaw tightened. "I don't remember the specifics. It was years ago." "The house sold for $387,000, I said. He stood up. He said he had done everything for me, that he had kept a roof over my head, that I was coming into his home to accuse him after everything he'd sacrificed. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said. "I'm asking what happened to money that was meant for me." Wendy appeared in the doorway. She was looking at my father, with an expression I couldn't fully read. I picked up my bag. "The lawyer will be in touch," I said. I walked out before either of them could respond. The trust account records arrived 5 weeks later. Annalise called me into her office, placed a thick folder on the desk, and said, "Carefully, I need you to be ready for this." The account had held the $387,000 from the property sale. Over the following 3 years, it had been drawn down to almost nothing. She walked me through it. A full kitchen and basement renovation on my father and Wendy's home, $94,000, 2 years of private school tuition for Ellis, $38,000 per year, a deposit on a property in Prince Edward County, a series of smaller withdrawals with descriptions that matched household expenses and family trips. When I turned 25, the account had $11,000 remaining. My father had said nothing. I had taken out student loans for nursing school. I had worked overnight shifts through second year to cover rent. I had told myself there was no safety net because I had believed completely that there wasn't one. My mother had built one. She had arranged it from a hospital bed in the last months of her life. And it had been used to renovate someone else's kitchen. I could not cry in Annalise's office. I kept my hands flat on my knees and looked at the numbers until they stopped meaning anything, and then I looked at them again. My aunt suggested we bring the family together. She wanted my father to hear the truth from the people who had trusted him, not only from a letter signed by a lawyer. I understood what she meant. There's a difference between a legal settlement and being seen. She organized dinner at her house. She told my father it was a belated celebration for the wedding, that she wanted to do something smaller and more personal. He agreed. Wendy confirmed they would come. Ellis said he'd be there. Patrick and I arrived early. Rosalind and I set the table, laid the documents in a folder beside her chair, organized by date, withdrawals highlighted, and didn't speak much. We just set out the plates and waited. By 7 o'clock, everyone was seated. The first 20 minutes were ordinary enough. My father talked about a renovation he was planning. Ellis asked Patrick about his work. Wendy helped herself to more bread. After dinner was mostly finished, I stood up, picked up the folder, and placed it open on the table. "There's something we need to talk about," I said. I watched my father's face shift. "My mother created a trust for me before she died," I said. "A property in Canada, held until I turned 25. You were named as trustee." I began laying the statements out. "The property sold for $387,000 in 2017. These are the withdrawal records from the trust account. $94,000 for your kitchen renovation. $38,000 per year for Ellis's private school fees. A deposits on the Prince Edward County property." The table was silent. Wendy had gone very still. "Walter," she said quietly. "What happened to the money my mother left me?" I said. My father began defending himself. He said the money had been used for the family, that raising a child was expensive, that I was reframing things I didn't understand. "I have the trust deed," I said. "It specifies that the funds were for my education and my future, not household renovations, not Ellis's tuition." My aunt spoke then quietly. "Walter, I trusted you with my sister's last wish. She died believing her daughter would be taken care of." He looked at her. Something moved through his expression, not quite guilt, more like the look of a person who has held a particular version of a story together for a long time, and has just seen someone light the edge of it on fire. Ellis had been sitting without speaking. He looked down at the statements on the table, then up at my father. "Dad," he said slowly, "did you use Celia's trust money to pay for my school?" My father didn't answer. Ellis looked at me. His face had gone pale. "I didn't know," he said. "Celia, I genuinely didn't know any of this." I believed him. That was the part that hurt in a different way. The part where you look across the table at someone and realize that they, too, had been living inside a story they hadn't written. "I know," I told him. My father pushed back his chair. He said something about being attacked by his own family, about gratitude, about everything he had given up that nobody appreciated. Then he walked down the hall and let himself out the front door. The sound of it closing was quieter than I expected. No one moved for a moment. Wendy looked at the statements still spread across the table. Then she looked at me. She didn't say anything. I don't know what she was thinking. I'm not sure it changes anything either way. The legal process took almost 5 months. My father's lawyer contacted Annalise within 3 weeks of the dinner. There was no court date. He agreed to a settlement. The terms required repayment of the misappropriated funds plus interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal. A total of just under $290,000 CAD, secured against his property and paid out over an agreed schedule. It was not everything. It was not my mother's house, which no longer existed in any form she would recognize. It was not the years I had spent believing there was no net beneath me, or the loans I had taken out that I hadn't needed to take, or the shifts I had worked without knowing I had another option. But it was the truth, legally acknowledged, on paper, with his signature at the bottom. Annalisa called me when it was done. "It's finalized," she said. I sat with that for a full minute before I responded. A few weeks later, my aunt drove to my apartment and handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check. "This is from me," she said. "Not from the settlement. I've had money set aside for years that I didn't know how to give you. I kept thinking the trust would come through on its own and this would feel unnecessary. It didn't, and it wasn't, and I'm sorry I waited so long." I tried to give it back. She folded my hands around it. "Your mother asked me to watch out for you," she said. I should have watched harder. We sat on my couch for an hour afterward, not really talking about anything that mattered, just existing in the same room with each other. With part of the settlement, I enrolled in the nurse practitioner program at the University of Ottawa, the one I had looked at 3 years earlier and decided I couldn't afford. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday morning. I read it twice, then stuck it to the refrigerator with a maple leaf magnet Patrick had bought me as a joke on our first anniversary. Ellis texted me a few months after the dinner. It was short. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. I'm sorry you grew up without what she left you. If there's something I should understand or do differently, I want to know. E." I sat with the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. Let's talk sometime." We had coffee the following month. It was a little quiet and a little awkward, and also, I think, the beginning of something that might actually be real. My mother's letter, the one she clipped to the trust deed, that Rosalind kept in a metal box for 18 years, I had it framed. The letter and, beside it, the first page of the trust deed with her signature. It hangs in the small room I use for studying. I look at it when a concept isn't landing, or the coursework runs long, or I'm tired at the end of a week that asks too much of me. I look at it, and I think about her sitting down with a lawyer, in the middle of everything she was going through, making sure the paperwork was right, signing her name carefully at the bottom of a document that was meant to reach me. She couldn't have known that for years I would believe I had been left with nothing. She couldn't have known it would take me 29 years and one humiliating wedding toast and a folder of bank statements on my aunt's dining table to finally find my way to what she had always been trying to give me. But she had left it anyway. She had known, even then, that I was worth more than what I would be told. He had always been wrong about that. I just finally know it too. Before you go, I want to hear from you. If you found out a parent had used money that your other parent left specifically for you, what would you do? Pursue it legally, confront them privately, or let it go to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere new today, let me know where. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Subscribe if you're new to Family Shadows, because this was only one chapter.